You mean mute?
No, yes, and I'm going to ask everybody to mute, please, as well, so that we don't have a whole bunch of background noise. Or
Okay.
I will mute. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to mute all and just turn you on, Rowena.
Okay.
And you're all set, Rowena.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see your smiling faces, and the sun is shining. But it's pretty cold out there this morning when I was walking the dog. But oh, there's Keith. Good morning, Keith.
Hey, good morning. How you doing, Rowena?
Just fine, thanks.
Great.
Good. So for those of you who haven't attended a PROBUS meeting, and I think there are a couple of you anyway who haven't, it is tradition to start off with a joke. So here we go. So a small boy attended his first wedding. After the service, his cousin asked him, how many women can a man marry? 16, the boy responded. How on earth do you know that? Asked his cousin. Easy, said the boy. All you do is add it up. Like the minister said, 4 better, 4 worse, 4 richer, and 4 poorer. There's your morning smile. In the last month, we have had an executive meeting. I have also attended the virtual district meeting that was run by our PROBUS Canada chairman. Oh, for goodness sake, I'm having a senior moment.
Jamie,
yeah. And it was very interesting. I was actually quite surprised how many of clubs in our district, District 1, do not use Zoom to have their meetings. And I think we've done very well so far. Today I see we have 22 participants. I'd like to ask if any of the executive have any reports to make. David Doyle, is he there? David, do you have a report?
No, I have nothing to report.
Okay, I'd like to thank you for sending out the reminders to everyone. I think that's a really good thing. Roger, do you have any report? No, okay. Program committee, Anna and Jeannie, do you have a report? Do you have any hints for next month?
yes, for December, looks like we have somebody that's going to play some music, and we're looking for some recruits to have a couple of humorous Christmas stories. So we have a person that has agreed to play music, and I'm not going to make any comments yet, just to finalize all the details, but she has agreed to do it. So you know it's a she.
Good. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, I wonder if Tom is ready. He doesn't look as though he is.
I need 2 minutes.
You need
Perhaps
2.
You can tell some more jokes.
That's not the easiest thing in the world. In fact, I'm quite looking forward to next month when there is someone telling humorous Christmas stories.
And for those that are wondering about the mayor coming in December, she did have to postpone. And so now she has agreed to come in January to be our speaker.
That's good. I think we'll have a lot of questions to ask her one way and another.
Of course, they'll be all with a positive view.
Yes.
So if you're looking for jokes, I got a few today. Yes. And these are all thoughts on the coronavirus.
Uh-oh.
I'm as bored as an Amish electrician. Ontario has banned groups larger than 5. If you're a family of 6, You're all about to find out who's the least favorite.
Oh, that's terrible.
The longer this goes on, the harder it will be to return to a society where pants and bras are required.
Yeah. Okay, I see Tom there.
Okay,
I'm ready. That's,
okay, just 1 second and I'll just change to the.
I'll mute
proper-
myself and you can take it away, Anna.
Okay, just a second. I have to make sure that Tom is here, ready to go. Tom. Okay, Tom, you should be all ready,
all right.
except I can't find you. Oh,
So allow me to introduce Tom Byrne, who is a solicitor here and in North Grenville, also has an office in Cornwall, was called to the bar in 1993. And today he's going to discuss wills and estates and probate. So welcome, Tom.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So I will launch into it now, and I prepared a few thoughts, and Anna has briefed me to expect questions at the end. And so I will prattle along, but I am open if the moderator wants to interrupt me. You can do that, but I find it best to let me prattle on for a few minutes, and then maybe I'll pause and if it's appropriate. For the moderator thinks so, we can have questions in the middle. It's just sometimes I find it's on one hand it's ideal, but on the other hand sometimes people have burning questions that they need to get out, and so I am open to it if the moderator thinks so. Otherwise, I'm quite happy to have all questions held till the end. So there you go. So I'm going to try to obviously keep it non-legalistic and for a lay audience, and throw out general points, and as well try to dispel some myths that are out there. Okay, so the first thing is what is a will and why should you make a will? So a will is a testamentary document that disposes of your property and potentially your remains, to be professionally blunt, after you die. A will has no legal effect during your lifetime. It only has legal operation after death, and that leads to one of the myths that people have that I wish to dispel. Sometimes people will say to me, I am going to get something in a will, and they feel that is guaranteed, and really it isn't, because in most cases, because wills can be changed. So someone may have promised you something in a will, or shown you their will, or told you what their will says, but it might not really say that, or they can change it next week, even if it does say that. There are limits, there are exceptions to what I've just said though. For example, if someone becomes mentally incompetent, then they cannot change their will. So the will they made last year will now be locked in forever, because they'll never be competent to change it before their death. Or they may have contracted with you to give you something in their will, which would be binding on them, and they can't change it later. And that can be almost any kind of contract, but it typically arises in spousal arrangements between spouses or former spouses, either in separation agreements or divorce proceedings, something like that. It happens. But generally speaking, we have what's called testamentary freedom. So people are free to make their will any way they want and give their property to anyone they want. Again, generally speaking. In some provinces, such as British Columbia, you are required to give certain amounts to your family. But in Ontario and in most jurisdictions, you actually are not. There is a consideration that must be kept in mind, though, which is the Family Law Act in Ontario, is that when someone passes away, the surviving spouse has an election, which means a choice to make whether to take, according to the will, whatever their spouse gives them, or to make a claim for an equalization of property against the estate of their deceased spouse. So although technically such a claim doesn't invalidate a will, that's very technical. The practical reality is a spouse's claim can override a will. So in a simple example, if a couple has been together a long time, or frankly, even a short time, if they're legally married, and this again applies to legally married people, it does not apply directly to common law spouses. The typical thing is most people will give everything or almost everything in their will to their spouse. But if they do not do that, and if they make a will, for example, giving everything to their children and skip their spouse, the spouse may not accept that. And that does happen, especially in certain cultures. They want to not give anything to their surviving spouse. They want to give everything to the children. And the spouse is sometimes left basically poor, and the spouse may not accept that. And the spouse may end up making a claim against the estate to get at least half of the estate. So that's something to keep in mind. Another myth to dispel is that people will think that if I don't make a will, the government will get all of my property and money. That isn't true except in the rarest of circumstances. And that kind of scare tactic, I call it, is used in certain advertising you will see on television or radio or social media on the internet for will kits that stationers companies produce to have you make your own will yourself without a lawyer. And I'm going to talk more about those in a minute, but I simply want to say that we have a law called the Succession Law Reform Act, which governs how a will is to be made, generally speaking. And to the point now, it governs what happens if you don't have a will, which is called an intestacy. Testacy is when you have a will governing the estate. Intestacy is when there is no will. So we use the phrase, someone died intestate. That means they died without a will. To make the joke that my law professor always made, dying intestate does not mean dying on the highway to Florida. It means dying without a will. So when that occurs, the Succession Law Reform Act governs who gets your property, which is if you have a surviving widow or widower, surviving spouse, they get the first $200,000. And then the rest is divided between your children if you have children. If you have no children, then your surviving spouse gets everything. And only if no heirs can be found, and that means of any degree. So it could be third cousins if you have no children. It's happened to my career when once or twice an old bachelor dies and I was giving out 64th shares to all these second cousins and nieces and nephews. And so only if there are no no family members at all can be found, in those rare circumstances, then the government does get the property. It escheats to the crown. But that has never happened in my career to me, in my practice, and I've not actually heard of a case in modern times where they can't find anyone, any distant relative. So it is not true that if you don't have a will, the government gets your money. That is not true. So a will needs to be in writing, and it needs to be witnessed by 2 witnesses, unless you do what's called a holograph will, and that is handwritten in your own hand entirely. And that means not with a will kit that you would buy. The will kits that people buy, many of them are actually good, to be fair, if they are completed correctly. And that is where people make a mistake. Typically, they mess up their own will by incorrectly completing the will kit. The will kits are all prepared with the advice of lawyers. And I would say, I would use the analogy, it's like using the manual to fix your own car. If you read the manual and you follow directions properly, you will do the right thing because the manual is right. But if you don't understand what it means, technical language, or you make a mistake because you are not a mechanic, then you will not repair your car properly. And similarly, I have seen cases, and I'm very afraid of this, that people don't use the will kits properly and they will make a mistake. And so that is why I discourage them. In all cases, whether it is in printed form with type print, or in your handwriting, the will must be signed. In Ontario, we do not have the legality of video wills. In some United States jurisdictions, video wills are accepted, but so far the Ontario courts have ruled they are not, and they are invalid. Sometimes, though, some lawyers are in the habit, I am not, but some are in the habit of videoing the meeting where the person gives the instructions to the lawyer and signs the will, just as corroborating evidence of the testator's, that means the client's testamentary capacity, which in simple terms means they were of sound mind and knew what they were doing. And so I haven't yet started this practice, maybe I might, but some lawyers will actually video the will interview, the will meeting with the lawyer. An important thing to note that your will does, and sometimes is actually overlooked by non-lawyers, is the appointment of executors. The executors who become your estate trustees are the people in charge of your estate, and they are to administer your estate according to law. They can't do anything illegal, even if you were to say so in your will, but to be guided by and governed by the will. And so sometimes people making their own will at home, or even with a will kit, they'll make the will properly technically, except they won't name an executor, and that's a common flaw we see. They don't put anyone in charge, and so that means someone will have to apply to court to become the estate trustee with a will to follow once they get that appointment. So let's see, the basic scheme of a will is to give all of your money and property to the trustee or your executors to be governed according to the will. The basic first duties they have to do is take an inventory of your assets and their value, and they have to pay the bills. So various legal accounting expenses will have to be paid, and Revenue Canada has to be paid. The executors have to file the tax returns. And basically all the bills and then the debts have to be paid, legitimate debts, before anyone gets anything. And so that's a principle to always be kept in mind. Whether there's an intestacy or a testacy, the bills have to be paid first. If there is, fortunately, something left over, which usually there is, then you carry on and you administer the estate according to the gifts made in the will to the beneficiaries. On some occasions, I've seen a couple of times where clients are involved with a financial planner, and this is just an apocryphal story, something to be mindful of. And these are usually people of fairly significant means, and they fall into the trap of what I call over planning their estates. So what they do before they die, of course, is they have put most of their wealth into insurance policies or segregated fund investments, or RRSPs with designated beneficiaries, or TFSAs with designated beneficiaries, all of which is done under the advice of a financial planner, and all of which per se is sound advice to have assets move directly to beneficiaries outside the will and the estate, not fall into the control of the executors, and not fall into probate. And we'll talk about probate process in a moment, but to avoid probate tax. And I've seen cases where people have given out all of their money through those financial planning mechanisms, and then they basically die poor, which was in a way what was intended, but they have no money counterintuitively to bury them, frankly, and to pay the final taxes. And so when I encourage you, if you're in that situation, you have to have a consultation with both your financial planner and your lawyer to sort of project the cash need of the estate on your death, to basically pay the final bills, including burying you, and to pay Her Majesty. Because in one case in particular I can think of, we had to claw back money from beneficiaries that they had gotten to get them to kick back money in the estate so that the government could be paid, because there was no cash. Sometimes the need for cash is taken care of itself by financial planning, by buying an investment or a life insurance policy that deliberately makes the estate the beneficiary, so that, just to pick a round number, there is at least $50,000 or $100,000 of cash, liquid, quickly, that the executors can get hold of to pay the bills. Another topic that wills sometimes deal with deliberately, but sometimes don't, because this is optional, is your testamentary wishes as to your funeral arrangements, okay? So what you can do is put instructions for your executor for what funeral arrangements you want or do not want. And sometimes they are very detailed, I've been asked to do, and sometimes they are extremely simple. Sometimes people have very strong views about burial versus cremation. And sometimes they know where they want their remains to be buried or interred, and they let me know that, and they put that in the will, which is wonderful to do. If you don't give directions, your executor then has full discretion as to the funeral arrangements. There is always a wrinkle to this, though, is that many people these days listen to the advertisements of funeral homes, and it is a good idea, and they purchase funeral contracts in advance of their death. And that is wonderful, but then you need to tell your executor you have done that, so that that is taken advantage of by your executor. Similarly, you need to tell your executor the funeral arrangements made in the will, because naturally, after someone passes away, it is the funeral arrangements which take priority, and calling the lawyer and getting a copy of the will might take days or possibly a week or two, depending on the time of year and the lawyer's availability and holidays and all that. And so there is no point having your elaborate funeral arrangements set out in your will if you haven't advised the executor of this beforehand. And that is one of the reasons why I am not a huge believer in secrecy. The point of making a will is to pick an executor you trust, one or more persons, to follow your wishes and to obey your wishes. I advise people to show the will to the executor so the executors are not surprised after the death. Also, it's even a good idea to get the permission of your executor before you come and see your lawyer or make your own will, to know that the person will act for you as your executor. I do run into some people, though, that are very secretive, and they will name an executor and they are too shy to tell that person what they are doing. And then we will find out whether the person will be willing to do the job only after the testator has died. Because what I do not do is I do not call up people and tell them, oh, you're in the will and you're going to be the executor of so-and-so. That is for the client to do that. When a will is made, I just sit on it and do nothing until I get advice that the person has passed away. So probate of wills. A few years ago, the law was changed to change the legal term for letters probate to a certificate of appointment of a state trustee. And what that simply is ratification by the court. It's a kind of a court order authorizing the estate trustees to administer your estate. And you can get one if there's a will, and if there is no will, there's a different format, but you can get one in the case of an intestacy, no will. So that is the court's ratification of the power of the estate trustee. And that will typically be required by third-party financial institutions, most banks, virtually all investment companies and stock brokerages, and it may be required by the land registry office depending on the nature of real property that you own. And there's a whole technical area there that I won't get into. So the first thing to say is that the general principle is that it is not required as a matter of law, absolutely, that your executors get probate of your will. But in many cases, the practical answer is yes, it's almost automatic that you will have to do that because you own a stock portfolio, or you have a substantial bank account, or you have the ownership of real estate that requires that according to the rules of the land registry office, because your estate won't be able to sell your house to raise money without the probate. So in a way, it's fairly simple. There are forms to fill out, and then there's a probate tax to pay, which is about 1.5% of the value of the estate, and there you go. So actually, I'm just going to check something because I may have misspoken there. Maybe it's actually lower than that. Yeah, it's about 1.5% is the tax. So the tax is there, but it is not inordinate. Many people, as I was alluding to earlier, get inordinately afraid of the probate tax. Quite often it is the capital gains taxes that really will hit your estate, and the probate tax is relatively negligible. I'm going to pause at the moment. I was asked to carry on about powers of attorney too, which I can, or I can take questions about wills if you like now, or that can be held.
I think Jeannie has a question, so I'll start with Jeannie, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, hi. What if you wanted to make a minor change to your will? Does that mean you have to do a completely new will?
Absolutely not. Great question. You can do what is called a codicil. We have these fancy jargon terms, but a codicil is a document that amends your will, makes a relatively minor revision. So that's the short answer. That's often used for changing executorships.
Yes.
It's often used for removing a particular gift or adding a particular gift, but not to change the whole scheme of the will or a major portion of the will. Then you would do a new will. And it's basically when the lawyer gets the call, the lawyer discusses it with the client and about what change they want to make, and whether making that change simply does not affect the other parts of the will, or sometimes it does. It's a bit of a house of cards, right? Sometimes the person wants to remove someone that is named in 8 places of the will, and so really you better make a new will to make sure it's done properly.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There's another Jean. Jean, can you unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What happens if there is a prenuptial agreement where most of the assets are in one person's name and that person dies? Where does the spouse stand as far as the inheritance?
Yes, so that's an excellent question. So basically you have to look at what the prenuptial agreement says. In some cases, the whole point of the prenuptial agreement was to keep the 2 estates separate, and so in extreme cases, it will say that the surviving spouse gets nothing because that's what they agreed to 20 years ago. In other cases, it does provide for what the spouse gets. In some cases, I suppose the prenuptial agreement might not affect what the surviving spouse gets, and then their options are open to whatever the law gives them, and whatever the deceased gives them in their will, and that happens too. So really, you need to look at what the prenuptial agreement says to see how it affects the surviving spouse.
So the prenup really takes precedence over the will.
Yes, the short answer to that is yes, but the prenup agreements often say, including often when I do them, they often say this, in effect, to be simple. They say, we've agreed that we don't have to give each other anything in our wills, and the other person can make no claim against our respective estates. So you can't make any claim against me if you're not happy with what you get. But having said that, they typically do go on to say, we can, however, freely give each other something in our wills if we want to do that. So many times the prenup says the other person doesn't have a right to get anything. They can't make any claims, but they can accept a gift freely given in the will. So often the spouses will give each other something in their wills, even though they don't have to.
Thank you.
Okay. Tom, we have a question from Cam Thomas. Cam, you're unmuted. I unmuted you already, or you unmuted yourself?
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, good.
Thank you very much, Tom. That's really interesting. I wonder if you could talk for just a moment about executor fees. Don't quite understand how that works. They talk about the executor getting paid for their duties. What
Yes.
sort of levels are they? How is that figured out, and who makes sure that's done properly?
Right. That's a great question. So generally speaking, there's a rule of thumb in the law, which is that executors get about 5% of the value of the estate for doing their work of administering the estate. And that is a taxable income, by the way. It is not a free gift, just to contrast. If you get a gift in the estate, that's free. When you are getting an executor fee, you are earning an income, and so Revenue Canada views that as taxable. So if it is not contested by anyone, so a lot of these, and the majority, are settled out of court with all the beneficiaries agreeing that the executor, who I'll call Charlie, will produce a statement of accounts, basically showing all the beneficiaries what money he got in and what money he gave out. And he will say, this is what we got for selling the house and the car, and we had an auction of the furniture at Finity's, and we got $7,000 for everything. And this is what we have. And then I'm giving it out to each of the 4 beneficiaries. Of course, after we have paid Her Majesty's government, the accountant, and the lawyer, and whatever's left over will be divided 4 ways. But sort of the second last thing you do is you then calculate the executor's fee, which will typically be, again, 5% of the gross value. That is generally what the courts allow in a contested situation, which is called a passing of accounts. When you have to go to court to get a judge to approve of the accounting of the trustees and to approve of the compensation that they are proposing to take for themselves. And so generally that's how that's handled. When you more technically, when you go to court, you have to do a very detailed accounting, and it's 2.5% of the receipts, and 2.5% of the disbursements. And so, without bogging down in detail, there are some tweaks to that, but that generally it generally rounds out to 5%. Or in court, because of the way they do it in court, it tends to be a little bit less than 5% is the reality. And but again, that is also a rule of thumb. The executor's compensation is for the work they are doing. And so although we start with the value of the estate, if you have identical estates, I use this example a lot. If you have someone that has $1 million in a stock portfolio or GICs or something, the reality is it takes 1 hour or less, maybe, you need to liquidate that money and get it ready for distribution to the beneficiaries. I may be exaggerating a bit, but you have a few meetings and phone calls to the bank and a meeting to show them the paperwork and sign the liquidation forms. But it's quite easy for the executor to liquidate and ascertain the money. If the twin brother of that deceased person also dies, but he has no cash in the bank, but he owns 4 homes in Kentville that he rents out, and they're worth $250,000 each, his gross value is also $1 million. But it's going to be a lot more work for the executor to deal with the tenants and deal with the realtors and arrange sales of the properties. And so that executor may well have a claim for a lot more than 5%. Conversely, the executor that's dealing with easily liquidated assets, he may have to accept a lot less. He might get, 1 or 2 or 2.5% would be plenty for such a person because they didn't have much work to do.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? I see Rolly there. If you'd like to unmute yourself, Rolly, and ask the question of Tom. And I think this will have to be the last question. There we go, Rolly, you're all set.
Okay, I understand probate. This probate estate excludes licensure. The beneficiary of life insurance does not go to probate.
Yeah, yes, that's correct. Yes, if there's a named beneficiary of the life insurance, they get their money directly from the insurance company, and the money does not go through probate, and no probate taxes paid. That's correct.
As for wills, I'm of opinion that the original will stays with the lawyer, and ask the lawyer to prepare certified 2 copies, keep one at home and give one to its tester.
If I understand you right, yes, it can go just like that. If the will, however, needs to be probated, the original will be deposited in the court file.
If probate is necessary.
That's right. And ultimately, when the lawyer's done their work, usually the executor should have the original will.
Right. Okay, last question. You said in Ontario, if you die intestate, the first 200,000 goes to the wife, and the rest goes to the kids. That's not my understanding. My understanding is that the first 200,000 goes to the wife, and the rest is equals share between the wife and kids.
Yes, and perhaps I misspoke, Rolly. The shares depend on the number of children, but basically, if there is one surviving wife and one child, it would be equal between the wife and child.
After the first 200,000.
After the first 200,000 goes to the wife. If there are more children, then it would be 200,000 to the wife, 1/3 to the wife, 2/3 to the children.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Tom, for taking the time out of your, I'm sure, busy schedule to do a presentation to us. It is certainly a topic of interest, not only to people our age, but really to people of any age, to be prepared for what we sometimes don't want to face. So thank you very much, Tom, for taking the time to do this. I'm sure we all learned something. So I'll just pass.
You're very welcome.
Okay. I'll just open the, Rowena, if you want to say a few words before we start with the next part of our program.
Yes, I found that absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Tom.
You're very welcome.
I was, my husband and I were on the receiving end of a terrible situation when his cousin died, unfortunately, just after her 65th birthday. And we were left with her dying breath. She told the policeman to contact my husband. And then the poor man had to do everything from scratch because she had not left a will. So, and it ended up with 3 people that she'd never met getting her entire estate. So it was yes, you should always leave a will.
Yes, you have said more there than I could, Rowena. That's very good. That is the point.
Yeah.
And-
oh, absolutely. It wasn't just a small amount. It was close to $2 million, and that was about 25 years ago. So it was, yeah. She owned 4 houses in downtown Toronto. It was, yeah, quite an experience.
And Tom, I understand you have some obligations, so don't feel that you have to stay. You're more than welcome to stay on, of course.
Well, I appreciate that, but I'll take my leave now then, Anna. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Tom.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, we're on to the second part of our program, and we're very lucky to have Dan Bennett, who is part of the Toastmasters Club. And he is going to deliver a story that is both real and fits into the ideals of Remembrance Day, which of course occurred just a few days ago. The story follows Dan's uncle, young Ray Bennett, and his experiences in World War II. Please welcome Dan and his speech entitled Soldier Boy.
Thank you, Rowena. Do everybody hear me okay? Perfect. Britain and the Commonwealth, which included Canada, declared war on Germany and its allies on September the 3rd, 1939. This sparked fervent enlistment as young and old tried to join the military. Historically, the youngest to join was 13 years old. The oldest was 80. But the average age of recruits was 26 in Canada. The age limit, of course, at that time was 21. But still, over 700,000 boys joined the Canadian military. If you were under 21, you had to lie. If you looked old enough, you were approved. If you didn't look old enough, you were either refused or shunted to one of the more non-military roles in the military, which could be the Merchant Marine, which historically we know was not a good place to go. Uncle Ray was only 16 when he went to sign up. He looked old enough and he was approved and sent to basic training. The whole time he was in basic training, he was worried that his mother would come and get him and drag him away. But he made it through basic. He was sent with his group to join the Western Defence Force in Canada, and they were sent by train to British Columbia. Once in BC, they were sent by ship and offloaded at Prince Rupert in northern BC. Them and their tents were dumped just outside of town. After a couple of weeks of setting up, they were sent by barge about 25 miles from Prince Rupert to a little island, a US island, just off the coast of Alaska. There, they dug in, built up buildings, and waited. And waited. For almost a year and a half, they waited in the rain, in the cold, in the dark. They saw nothing. One night, young bored Ray, who was in charge of a gun emplacement, yelled, "Enemy aircraft!" and opened fire. Soon, all the other guns, the machine guns, all joined in. Everybody was awake. The next morning, the CO called young Sergeant Ray into his office. That was the first time Ray Bennett was broken back to private. Finally, on December 7th, 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and the US joined the war effort. The Americans soon arrived and took over their US islands and sent us Canadians packing. and they also started building the Alaskan Highway. Ray was sent back to Ontario, and after a short R&R, was posted to a training regiment and promoted back to sergeant because now he had to train new recruits. He was eventually posted to Britain and shipped out of Halifax. And years ago, I found the statement of Ray and his ship at Pier 21 in Halifax Museum, the museum there. He had more training in Britain and ate lots of mutton. 50 years later, he would still shudder at the thought of memories of the wool floating in the stews. Ray was later sent to Italy and was part of the amphibious assault on Sicily on July 10th, 1943. Later, there was a second waterborne assault on the Italian mainland on September 3rd, 1943. Ray saw some of the worst fighting in the war, with every foot being gained by bloody step. It ended only on February 25th, 1945, at the cost of 26,000 Canadian casualties. Ray missed the D-Day invasion of France but he had already gone through 2 invasions of Sicily and Italy. But his army was known as the D-Day Dodgers and ridiculed by higher-ups, by the Mucky Mucks. And they come back with a very tongue-in-cheek and sarcastic song in their own defense, which I urge you to look up. Early in 1945, Ray was called into another CO's office and told that the Army had just discovered that he was underage, too young to serve in the military, and he was going to be shipped home on the next ship back to Canada. Ray said, "Sir, I've been serving for almost 5 years, and I'm going to turn 21 while I'm on the ship. Couldn't you please just misplace the file?" The CO just looked at him, said nothing, but took the file and put it on the bottom of the pile. Ray never volunteered much about his experiences in the military, only if it was sparked by something recent around the news. After a US airstrike killed 4 Canadian soldiers in Afghanistan, Ray railed against the US Air Force. He had been bombed and strafed by friendly aircraft fire more than once in Italy and had lost many friends and comrades. Following the Vietnam War and our boys coming back from Afghanistan, Ray admitted that he probably suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which they would have referred to as shell shock in World War II. He had experienced alcohol and anger problems after World War II, and he said he may not have been the best husband. But all in all, Ray may have been a high-spirited boy when he joined up, but after 5 years in uniform, he returned home a man and a hero. Maybe he did suffer from cell shock, but he became a pillar of his community, a volunteer fireman, a farmer, a father, provider, and a proud legionnaire, proud member of the Toledo Legion. He was inquisitive, never afraid to try something new, the kind of man you could depend on, a man to be proud of. Ray was our soldier boy. Thank you.
Wow. All I can say is absolutely wow. Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed it. And I might add that he was jolly lucky to get mutton. The rest of us had to make do on what we could catch. I can remember my mother at the end of the war going out looking for rabbits and catching rabbits in the back fields. So yeah, he was lucky to get mutton. Thank you so much, Dan.
You're welcome.
Anyone have any questions for Dan? No? Then in that case, I think I'm going to add a little something, if you don't mind. Last week, I was fairly electrified to see a plea on the CTV News for socks for homeless people on the streets of Ottawa. And apparently socks are what is most needed. And it triggered something in my mind, because there are several members of this PROBUS club who are also members of the Ottawa Women's Canadian Club. And I thought perhaps you might be interested in something about knitting. And apparently knitting during COVID is becoming very popular again. However, in World War II and in World War I, I have both numbers for both wars, but in World War II, which is more appropriate for today, a total of, they had a knitting committee at the Ottawa Women's Canadian Club, and in total 14,435 knitted garments were completed during the years of the war. One member completed 300 pairs of sea boot stockings. Another knitted 331 various articles, and yet another completed 356 pairs of minesweeper mitts. One member, who was almost completely blind, averaged 10 to 12 pairs of socks each month. Another knitted an average of 2 sweaters a week, and yet another completed 419 helmets and several sweaters. 8 members formed a knitting club and delivered garments faithfully to the office. So that sort of ties in with Dan's talk, and I can sympathize with his uncle. My husband had a cousin who came to Canada supposedly to stay for the war in 1939. I think he was on the last boat across the Atlantic. And then he left when he was 17 and went back to England and volunteered and lied about his age. So Dan, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed it. Now, next month, as Anna says, hopefully we will have some music and some humor from another member of Toastmasters. My goodness, if Dan is the quality you're getting from the Toastmasters Club, Anna, we are on the right track. So I think that was wonderful.